Testing, 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everyone, East Coast to West Coast. We are live here in the Weather Co-op Forecast and Studio. I am Jay Dubensky, in case you didn't know that, but if you're following me on my Instagram and watching this, you already know that. We are taking a kind of a deep dive into the tropics. Right now, we'll take about 15 or 20 minutes and review that. I just want to make sure that we have good audio, good video, and all of our platforms are streaming the way that they should be, and it looks like that is the case. I hope you are all having a great morning wherever you are. There are a few trouble spots across the U.S., but just a couple. We'll go over that. Erica will have that coming up later on also, as she goes literally coast to coast with her amazing forecast. But we are going to focus on the tropics right now. And of course, all eyes are on Hurricane Ernesto. And if you have any comments, by the way, especially on IG, put them in there, but even on YouTube or Facebook, I can see them on the stream here, and we'll do our best to get back ASAP on those. Ernesto has been having a pretty difficult time, difficult go of it as far as hurricanes are concerned, with some issues in the atmosphere, and I'll show you that in a little bit more detail. But as of right now, the latest update still has Ernesto at a weak Category 2 hurricane. The pressure has been dropping fairly rapidly since yesterday, and that is indicative of, at least near the center of circulation, that it's trying to get its act together. However, it is being impacted by a lot of dry air, which I will show you how that actually influences the development of a tropical cyclone and inhibits it. But going through the maps here, we have a quick look at Ernesto's position now, which was approximately 255 miles south of Bermuda, the island of Bermuda. And it has slowed down a little bit. Speed is at about 13 miles an hour right now, which you would think in an ideal scenario that would allow for some very strong intensification with a storm like this being over such open, warm water. But it's not the case. We don't see Ernesto at this point getting that much stronger. Might add 5 miles an hour in the sustained winds, 10 at the most, I think, at this point. And it does not look like it will make it to Category 3 status. If anything, over the next 12 hours, it is going to peak off and gradually start that slow weakening process. And it will take a while because it's going to be over warm water for quite a while here in the 36-hour time frame or so. But once it gets past the latitude of, say, coastal New Jersey, New York, Cape Cod, then it will start to encounter some much colder water and will deteriorate at a much more rapid rate. The forecast track, as you can see here, takes it north-northeast, so it will impact the island of Bermuda, and right now that looks to be somewhere in the Friday late evening toward midnight and early AM on Saturday. And the issue that I think is going to be of most concern here is going to be wave action and surge. Because moving at 13 miles an hour, it is going to propagate those waves for quite a while as it slowly works over Bermuda. And yesterday, the forecast track, if you were paying attention, was a little bit more to the west of the island, which would have set Bermuda up for the worst of the winds in terms of its position relative to the center of circulation. But now the track basically, and I'll show you all the model members in a minute, has it essentially going right over the island of Bermuda, which is a better case scenario than what we were looking at yesterday, but still, it will bring the maximum wave action over the island. And, yesterday we were looking at Ernesto potentially getting to a very strong Category 2, and looking at wave models that were maxing out somewhere around 80 to 90 feet out over the open water. And I was saying this for the last 3 or 4 or 5 days. It would not be a good weekend to plan that cruise out of New York going out toward Bermuda. And that's still not the case. You do not want to be anywhere near waves like that. And that wave action is going to make it all the way to the eastern seaboard. We're going to have rip current risks for several days. So if you're going to the shore to get some late summer beach action going, do not go in the water, please. Please, 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 please. We say this all the time, and there ends up being someone who doesn't hear it, goes in the water, gets caught in a rip, and they think they can get out of it, and they end up having to be rescued by the Coast Guard or worse. So just don't tempt fate that way. Stay away from the water. As we look at the path of Ernesto going past Bermuda, there are a couple of things in play here. And the most prominent of which is this trough that we've been forecasting for days that's developing over the northeast. And that is going to keep Ernesto from making any kind of westward progress toward the coast. And that's a good thing. Eventually, Ernesto is going to take more of a pronounced recurve more toward the northwest, but that won't be until it gets up, close in latitude to Maine, and begins to degrade even further into an extratropical system, and that will take several days. So actually, Ernesto, believe it or not, is going to be a weather maker for, I would say, Great Britain, Scotland, and eventually Europe by early next week. Sometime in that time frame. It'll certainly make the trek across the ocean, not as a tropical entity, but it will pack a punch for other people other than just here near the U.S. Taking a look at the next view here. Okay, this is an overlay of both the sea surface temperatures, the satellite imagery that you can see pretty clearly, the radar, the wind barb movement, those arrows, we refer to them as wind barbs, and the colorful lines that you see near Ernesto are what we call the spaghetti plot tracks. So when the computers run the modeling for tropical storm movement, all of the different, what we call model members, so there are several different models that compute solutions for tropical storm paths. And all of those models are taken into consideration. They're compared to one another. And they come up with these spaghetti plot overlays so that they can work up what they call a consensus. And within usually the middle of that consensus, the mean, they plot their actual track. So the National Hurricane Center will take that mean and go through the center of it and use it as their forecast track. This is pretty interesting because as you look at Ernesto's short-term track, and yeah, that little speck there is the island of Bermuda. That was taking Ernesto right over the island. And all the members are showing that. I'm going to go back to that one more time and show that to you because it's actually something you don't get to see an awful lot. And we like to show it to you here at Weather Co-op. So these brighter blue, aqua blue colors here, this is a model that what we refer to this as an outlier. So usually that just gets discounted. Somehow it's got bad data input. And what you see in this close grouping here, this is more in line with what we would think a realistic track would be. So you have the Euro in here, you have the GFS, you probably have the Japanese model in here, you probably have the Canadian model, being that it's in that relative location, and that's what it's showing here primarily, those put together. You can see this kind of bob and weave, this uneven line to those tracks as Ernesto makes its way up and past Bermuda. That's because it's going to do its best to try and work more to the north. There are going to be some westerly winds involved, and there are going to be the impacts of that trough. So the track's going to try to keep itself moving in a general north direction, but the movement of that trough and the influence of that trough is going to continue to eventually push Ernesto more toward the north-northeast. And then once we get up here into the, like the 96-hour time frame, those model members are still very, very close together. So this is something that you like to see if you're forecasting, because you have a pretty good idea of where we're going to have a track here for a system. There are spaghetti plot models that look like spaghetti in a bowl sometimes, where they're just going all over creation, and you try to make some kind of reason out of that. But this is pretty settled in what they're thinking through the computer models. And by the way, the computer models are only as good as the input. So it's all computer driven. So it's input output, right? And one of the great things that our hurricane hunters do in all of the plane flights that they make in and out of these systems is they collect massive amounts of data from the instruments that they have both on board the Hurricane Hunter aircraft and in the drops that they make with their Renaissance that they drop through the storm all the way down to the water. That continually sends data back to the plane as it descends through the atmosphere. Those packages are then uploaded into the forecasting computers to help bring a more accurate data set into the computations for the models. And it's fascinating to know what goes into those, but with time, they get more accurate. The only problem that we see in forecasting the tropics is that with the changes to the ocean and the changes to the currents and the changes to the temperatures, it's always a catch-up process where we're catching up with the changes that are occurring on a planetary basis. And we can only be so accurate at what a computer can be asked to do. The storms are obviously more intense. They're occurring and extending into different areas, and farther to the north, farther to the south, and that trend is continuing. There's nothing that can be done about that. That's just the planet doing what it does. Look at even the warm water temperatures here. You can see how far those 80-degree water temperatures go. Once you get out into the open ocean, I mean, they're going all the way up, parallel to Nova Scotia and even out there, Newfoundland even. So the ocean is really, really warm. What that does for the next system is also something that we're looking at, because we do see, and I'll switch over here on this graphic, what we do see for potential looking ahead, we do have more development going on off the coast of Africa. This is the high resolution satellite that I'll show you here from, let me get that camera off. There it is for you. So this is an Ernesto on the left side of the screen, and the white clump right there to the north of the track, that is the island of Bermuda. So here is a great example of what's happening to this storm. If you notice here, if you draw like a diagonal line from the bottom left corner of the screen, up on an angle past Ernesto heading up toward the Carolinas. You can see how anything below that line really doesn't have a lot of noticeable cloud formation compared to everything north of that or out to the northeast of that. That's a sign that dry air is being introduced into the circulation of the storm. And Ernesto has been fighting dry air since it started its process of forming into a depression and into a tropical storm even, and impacting the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. It was still having to fight this dry air and the Saharan dust that was present this week across the Atlantic and the Caribbean. It looked as if it would be able to avoid some of that when we were looking at this about 48 hours ago. But there has been another area of dry air that's been introduced. Actually was an area that came off the southeast U.S. and was gradually pulled into the circulation of Ernesto. And it's kind of clear to see that at this point, where that kind of dry notch where you can see more ocean than clouds in this bottom, we call this the right rear quadrant, left rear quadrant of Ernesto. So it's sucking dry air into the circulation, and that's inhibiting it from developing. Obviously, we want to see warm, moist air being circulated around a tropical cyclone to strengthen it. And that it's just it's a speed bump. It's holding it from progressing that much further. Another element that is just starting to impact Ernesto is just a little bit more wind shear here. So we have some wind heights in the probably like 25,000 foot height that are shearing it a little bit from northeast to southwest. And that is working on the left front quadrant of Ernesto. So the left side is very ragged. Right side is very strong in comparison, and you can see that with the bright white and all the high cloud tops here, and even the eye. Even though the eye is very, very dirty, call it dirty, but it's ragged, you can still see the eye, and it's much more pronounced on the right front quadrant and right rear quadrant because that's where it's not getting as much interference, if you will, from the dry air. It looks like the dry air is going to stay with it through its track, so that's going to help keep the intensification down. Another element that we're seeing with this system, when you look at wind shear, it's going to get beat up a little bit more as it progresses north of Bermuda. So you're getting away from the typical westerlies that happen closer to the equator this time of the year, and you start to get into more like meridional pattern over the ocean, and you start to have more influence from different wind directions at different heights. And that is the nemesis of any tropical cyclone. It just rips it apart. So we'll see what happens there in the longer term. Moving ahead, and I thought you'd appreciate that image, we'll also show you what this dry air really looks like from a high-resolution satellite perspective. So this is a loop showing both the drier and more moist air masses across the Atlantic and the Caribbean. And with the coloration here, it's easy to pick out where Ernesto is. You can clearly see that this is as it formed: tropical wave, tropical depression, eventually tropical storm here approaching Puerto Rico. And you can see the bright colorations here in the blue and the green and the red and the yellow. That's what you should see in a tropical cyclone. But you also see this orange and brown coloration here. This is indicating dry air and even the Saharan dust, which you can pick out, especially here to the south. That just continues to wrap around Ernesto. And there at those last few frames, you can see that wedge of dry air working down and being ingested, we call it, pulled into the circulation of the system. So that's why Ernesto hasn't gone for that 115, 120 mile an hour strength that was showing up on some of the initial models a few days ago. The last thing I want to show you here with this other type of high-res satellite view, this clearly shows you more of the particulate in the atmosphere, as well as the convection. So you can see the Saharan dust. These are the Cape Verde Islands out here off the coast of Africa, and this pocket of what looks like clouds but is very flat, linear, that is dust, Saharan dust being picked up by the satellite. So if you work out to the west towards Ernesto, you can see this area of dust just to the east of it, and then you can see the dry air with the blue. That's basically clean, relatively clean air that's being drawn into the storm. And then to the north of it, which is what I'll cover next, you would think, wow, well, if you said that's dust, then there must be dust up here, right, Jay? No, that's not dust. That's actually other particulate matter. That's smoke. And we'll show that to you in a minute also. But that's the recap on Ernesto. And what's coming after Ernesto, this is probably the best view to show you that. We have a really strong complex that ejected off of Africa yesterday. We've been following that for several days now. And that does already show some signs that that might be the next system to possibly develop. So we'll look for that to form as a wave and see if it actually can develop. It really has to work through that Saharan dust that came off the coast with it. And that typically this time of year that happens because the outflow winds from the thunderstorms over Africa pick up the dust. And as it pushes across Africa, this large plume of dust gets thrown out into the ocean ahead of the ejecting storm complex. So you can see that. It's a perfect example of it, actually. So we'll see if the complex can overcome that and continue to develop. More to come in the next couple of days. So getting back to the next story and the last story of this hit, we'll cover the smoke because it's definitely important. We have a couple of different things here that we're looking at. This is more of a SATRAD loop of the country, quick 2-hour loop. And Erica will be back on shortly to cover this from East Coast to West Coast and what's going on for you for the next several days. But I wanted to quickly touch on two things: the potential for severe storms, but first, the smoke from the Canadian wildfires that have been burning for, really the entire month of August. If you look at some of the high-res products that we have available for satellite, there are multiple fires burning across Canada and up across the Canadian plains. The smoke that has been produced by those fires was picked up and carried across Canada and is now being drawn down across the northeast United States. If you know of anyone who has any breathing issues, or emphysema or COPD, definitely pay some extra attention with them. Let them know that they shouldn't be outside today if they can help it. There are numerous air quality alerts, which is indicated here by all of these gray shaded areas across far eastern New York State, the entire state of Vermont, the entire state of New Hampshire, almost, the western 2/3 of Massachusetts. And I wouldn't be shocked to see something potentially pop up for Connecticut and for even western Maine with this area of smoke. If I switch back, which I will do here, to this graphic, yeah, we'll get that over. Thanks, Jay. That's what I wanted to see. There. that makes more sense to you. All right. So the gray shaded areas are all air quality alerts. And it's very rare to get a clump of air quality alerts like that across the Northeast U.S. Um, so that gives you an idea of the severity of what's going on right now. And I'm really concerned about this. And actually, people have been sending photographs. And thank you for the submissions. If you don't already know about that, please send any photos that you get that are weather related or videos for that matter, and tag us. Tag us on any of our handles on X, on Facebook, on YouTube, on IG here, and we will gladly share those with credit, become a weather watcher, be part of the process here with Weather Co-op, where weather meets community, and we'll be happy to extend that. So the images that were coming from New England yesterday showing the red sunset is an indication of that smoke being in the air. Kind of looked like a California wildfire image. And that is something that needs to be taken seriously because, you know, the people that do have any kind of respiratory issues are going to be impacted by this and should not be outside. They should be in the air conditioning, controlled environments when at all possible. And that's going to continue. I believe the air quality alerts are in effect from midnight to midnight. And they may be extended into early Saturday. We'll see what happens with that. I'm going to go back and show you how that looks again on the, that's the best image, I think. There are a couple that I can choose from, but I think this is really the best one. You can see that smoke just pouring over the Northeast U.S. and eventually it's moving over Maine, so that's why I'm thinking that maybe Maine will issue some air quality alerts as well. Definitely not a good thing for anybody with any respiratory issues. And finally, we'll show you this last product here. This is one of my favorites. Get that over. There you go. Thank you. All right. It is another view, essentially, of the smoke, but this is more of a modeling solution for the smoke, the near-surface smoke. And as this gets taken into the loop, you can see how that high-impact area does linger over New England for a little while, eventually migrates up as we go through the weekend. But I think for the next 24 to 36 hours, you're going to be concerned about that, as will the people up in the northern plains. I mean, they've been dealing with the smoke from Canada all summer. So Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, you also have some smoke issues there. All right, that is the long and short of the tropics and the situation with the smoke from the fires. Erica will be on shortly to give her forecast update as well. Please follow, like, share, subscribe, all of the above. Glad to have you here on Weather Co-op, and have yourself a wonderful, wonderful Friday. What was that?
It's coming back again. It's doing a little loop-de-loop.
Oh, you got to talk about that. That's cool.
So I was like, oh man. I mean, we can try. Do you want to try if you're there and I'm at Chroma?
Ooh, we're tempting fate.
Let's just see. Should we tempt fate? Let's tempt it. Let's tempt it. growing